Welcome to the second episode in a two-part Legendarium series about the extraordinary life of Robert Louis Stevenson. On October 1st, 1881, Young Folks magazine began publishing Treasure Island under the pseudonym of Captain George North. The book received little attention in 1881, and Stevenson's wife Fanny confessed that she did not like Treasure Island. She even opposed it ever appearing in book form. That nonetheless happened in late 1883, and it became a bestseller. In Stevenson's lifetime, the number of copies of Treasure Island sold reached the tens of thousands. Reviewers declared that this work of sheer entertainment single-handedly freed children's literature from a moralizing rut. In 1882, Stevenson and Fanny moved to Héry in the south of France. There, Stevenson suffered a hemorrhage which confined him to bed, prevented him from speaking, and rendered him incapable of writing book-length fiction. By 1884, the Stevenson family relocated to Bournemouth, England. Despite his success as a writer, Stevenson also began to study piano and music composition at age 36. He took up playing the penny whistle and went on to write 123 original music compositions. However, Stevenson's musicianship would never be as sought after as his literature. Only 3 of his musical compositions would ever be published. During Stevenson's recovery, he wrote simple stories like A Child's Garden of Verses. After his recovery, Stevenson hoped to copy his success with Treasure Island by writing another boy's adventure story called Black Arrow. While it sold better than Treasure Island at the time, it has largely been forgotten today. He performed better with Kidnapped, another story that ran in Young Folks magazine in 1886. Set in the Scottish Highlands after the Jacobite Rising of 1745, the story relates the wanderings of young David Balfour in the company of the reckless Alan Breck. Although the novel earned Stevenson more recognition, it would not be his biggest success in the year 1886. For this year also marked the publication of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mister Hyde. Stevenson got the idea for this novella from a dream in which he saw a man changing into a monster by means of a concoction made from a mysterious white powder. Stevenson screamed in his sleep when Fanny woke him, and then he scolded her for interrupting the nightmare. He started writing furiously in bed the next morning, and in 3 days he completed a draft of almost 40,000 words. When he read the story proudly to Fanny and Lloyd, Fanny declared the story too sensational and outrageous, which prompted Stevenson to throw the manuscript into the fire. Stevenson then rewrote and polished the manuscript over the next 6 weeks. Although Stevenson later called it the worst thing he ever wrote, Dr. Jekyll and Mister Hyde sold 40,000 copies during the first 6 months. Unlike his previous books, this horror novella has a decidedly adult tone. A staid and respectable English scientist makes a drink which transforms him into a different man called Mr. Hyde, who goes on crime sprees across London. The money made financed the Stevenson family's next relocation to Saranac Lake, New York, in 1887. This time, Stevenson's widowed mother came along for the adventure, and what an adventure the family had. Together, they toured the South Pacific the following year. The Stevenson family stayed at the Hawaiian Islands for a time, and he became good friends with King Kalakaua. The family eventually settled on the island of Upolu in 1890. At the foot of Mount Vea, Stevenson built a home for himself and his family, which he called Velima. Continuing to write, he also became an advocate for the Samoans against white colonialists. The Samoans appreciated Stevenson's efforts, and they named him Tusitala, or Teller of Tales. Sadly, there would not be many more tales for Stevenson to tell. On December 3rd, 1894, at age 44, Stevenson died of a cerebral hemorrhage. During the previous 4 years, he wrote several books about his experiences in the South Pacific, which gained much attention at the time, but have since fallen into obscurity. He also left an unfinished manuscript titled Weir of Hermiston, which he believed would be his single greatest work. A group of nearly 60 Samoan men cleared a path to the summit of Mount Vea, where they buried Stevenson. A museum of his possessions and manuscripts later opened in the Samoan town of Apia. After his death, biographers and writers praised Stevenson, and his 2 best-known works, Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mister Hyde, are still widely read across the English-speaking world. Sadly, more than half of Stevenson's original manuscripts are now lost. During World War I, Stevenson's books briefly fell out of fashion, and the writer's descendants sold them off. Among the missing works are the original copies of The Black Arrow, The Master of Ballantrae, and Treasure Island. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.